Over 90% of our viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you love these stories, please subscribe. Your support is the inspiration that keeps this channel alive. The first time the fire department deliberately set flames 30 feet from my front lawn, Karen sprinted across the street screaming that my house was about to burn down. The fire marshal calmly raised one hand. "Please stay behind the safety cones." Karen pointed toward the wall of controlled fire. "You're destroying the neighborhood." The marshal didn't even glance at the flames. "No, ma'am." He looked directly at my bright green lawn. "We're protecting it." Karen stared at him, then at the dozens of firefighters standing comfortably beside my sprinklers, then back at the fire. That was the exact moment she realized her complaint about wasting water had become something far larger than she'd ever imagined. 5 days earlier, my biggest concern had been keeping my grass alive. My name is Ethan Cole, and every summer, Oakridge Hills seemed determined to bake itself into a giant patch of brown straw. Most homeowners watered twice a week because the HOA encouraged conservation, but my property backed against a narrow strip of undeveloped county grassland that dried out every July. After a small brush fire came dangerously close to our neighborhood 2 summers earlier, I upgraded my irrigation system with high-efficiency rotating sprinkler heads and moisture sensors. The system actually used less water than my old sprinklers. It simply watered more intelligently. Every morning at exactly 5:30, the sprinklers ran for 15 minutes before sunrise. By the time most neighbors woke up, the sidewalks were dry and the lawn looked healthy without wasting a drop. I never imagined anyone would complain. Karen did. She arrived one Tuesday morning carrying coffee in one hand and her familiar yellow clipboard in the other. "Ethan." "Morning." She stood beside the lawn while the last sprinkler completed its rotation. "I've received several concerns." "About grass?" "About excessive irrigation." I looked around. The lawn wasn't flooded. There weren't puddles. Even the driveway had already dried. "What exactly is excessive?" She pointed dramatically toward the sprinkler head. "People believe you're using far more water than necessary." "I installed high-efficiency heads." "That's what you claim." "I have the installation report." She ignored that. "The neighborhood should present a unified appearance." "It does." "Your lawn is noticeably greener." I blinked. "You're saying my grass is too healthy?" "It creates unfair comparisons." Gus happened to be walking his golden retriever down the sidewalk. He stopped. "I'm sorry." He looked at Karen. "Did you just fine a lawn for succeeding?" Karen didn't acknowledge him. She opened her clipboard. Maintaining landscaping significantly outside neighborhood norms encourages unnecessary competition. Mrs. Alvarez stepped out onto her porch just in time to hear that sentence. "Ethan's grass is green because he waters before sunrise." Karen looked toward her. "The amount remains excessive." I pointed toward the controller mounted beside the garage. "It measures soil moisture." Karen folded her arms. "Machines don't determine community standards. They determine whether grass needs water." She tore a bright yellow notice from the clipboard. $150 for excessive irrigation and creating visual inconsistency. I looked down at the violation. "Visual inconsistency?" "Your property contrasts too sharply with neighboring lawns." "So my punishment." I looked up. "Is having living grass?" Karen smiled politely. "Consistency benefits everyone." She turned and walked away before anyone else could ask questions. Gus waited until her SUV disappeared around the corner. "I've lived 64 years. He shook his head. "I've now officially seen someone get fined for chlorophyll." That evening, I decided to stop guessing. Instead of arguing with Karen, I wanted facts. I called the company that had installed my irrigation system. The owner, Miguel Santos, arrived the next morning carrying a digital flow meter and a laptop. We tested every sprinkler zone. He checked pressure, spray overlap, soil absorption, and moisture readings. After nearly 2 hours, Miguel looked at the final report and laughed. "What?" "Your system uses 23% less water than the average residential setup." "So Karen's wrong." "Very." He tapped the screen. "You've actually got one of the most efficient irrigation systems I've measured this month." I smiled. I had a feeling. Miguel packed away his equipment. "You know," he hesitated. "There's one more thing." "What?" He pointed toward the dry county grassland beyond my backyard fence. "See that?" The tall grass had already turned pale yellow, despite it only being early summer. "It dries earlier every year." "I've noticed." "My brother works for the county wildfire mitigation team." That caught my attention. "They've been looking at neighborhoods bordering undeveloped grassland." "For what?" "Firebreak planning." I frowned. "What does my sprinkler system have to do with that?" Miguel smiled. "Probably nothing." He paused. "Unless someone from the fire department happened to notice how consistently green your property stays." The idea seemed interesting. Then I forgot about it, until Friday afternoon. A white county pickup truck pulled into my driveway. Across the door were 4 words that immediately caught everyone's attention. County Fire Prevention Division. Karen happened to be driving past at that exact moment. She slowed almost to a stop. 2 uniformed officials stepped out of the truck. One introduced himself with a firm handshake. "Fire Marshal David Reynolds." The other carried a large tablet filled with aerial maps. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about your irrigation system." Karen remained parked across the street, watching, listening, trying very hard to look like she wasn't watching or listening. I invited the 2 officials into the backyard. They spent nearly 40 minutes examining sprinkler coverage, soil moisture, water pressure, and the healthy strip of grass running along the county property line. Finally, Marshal Reynolds stood quietly, looking toward the dry grassland beyond my fence. Then he smiled. "This," he looked back at me, "is exactly what we've been searching for." I frowned. "For what?" He tapped the aerial map. "A real neighborhood." Before I could ask another question, Karen crossed the street carrying her clipboard. "I'd like to know why the fire department is inspecting this property." Marshal Reynolds introduced himself. Karen smiled confidently. "I'm actually the person who reported concerns about excessive watering." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "I know." Karen looked pleased. "I thought you might." "We reviewed your complaint." She folded her arms. "And?" He smiled politely. "I'd like to thank you." Karen blinked. "For what?" "For bringing this lawn to our attention." She smiled. "I knew there was a problem." "There wasn't." He looked back toward my lawn. "There was an opportunity." Karen's smile disappeared. Marshal Reynolds turned the aerial map around so everyone could see it. A thick green line stretched directly through my property. "What you're looking at," he said calmly, "is the safest natural fire break in this entire section of Oakridge Hills." Karen stared silently at the map, then at my lawn, then back at the marshal. She had absolutely no idea what a fire break was. Karen looked at the map as though it had suddenly switched languages. "A fire break?" Marshal Reynolds nodded. A firebreak is an area designed to slow or stop the spread of wildfire. He pointed toward the dry county grassland beyond my backyard. When vegetation out there ignites, flames don't simply stop at property lines. Karen frowned. We've never had a wildfire here. Not a major one. He zoomed in on the aerial map. But we've had 6 brush fires within 5 miles during the last 3 summers. Several neighbors who had wandered over exchanged uneasy looks. Mrs. Alvarez quietly spoke first. I remember the smoke 2 years ago. So do I, the marshal replied. The wind shifted before it reached Oakridge Hills. He looked toward my lawn. If it hadn't... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Karen crossed her arms. I'm still not seeing what this has to do with sprinklers. Marshal Reynolds smiled patiently. Healthy, hydrated grass burns much more slowly than dry vegetation. He knelt and pulled a small moisture meter from his equipment bag. After pressing it into my lawn, the screen flashed a reading. He walked 10 feet beyond the property line into the county grass. The second reading appeared almost instantly. He turned the display toward everyone. Soil moisture on Mr. Cole's lawn. He tapped the first number. 28%. Then the second. County grassland? 3%. Even Gus whistled. That's a pretty big difference. It is, the marshal agreed. The greener strip surrounding Mr. Cole's property naturally interrupts surface fire. Karen looked unconvinced. So you're saying his lawn could stop a wildfire? I'm saying it could slow one. He pointed across the neighborhood. And sometimes slowing a fire by even 30 seconds is enough for firefighters to save an entire street. The crowd became noticeably quieter. Marshal Reynolds opened another folder. Our department has been studying neighborhoods that border undeveloped land. He looked toward me. We've actually been searching for properties that already demonstrate effective vegetation management. Karen blinked. You've been looking for lawns? We've been looking for real-world examples. She stared at my grass as if it had personally betrayed her. I reported him because he was wasting water. Marshal Reynolds gently shook his head. Our inspection shows the opposite. He handed her Miguel's efficiency report. This irrigation system uses significantly less water than average while maintaining healthier vegetation. Karen scanned the first page. Her expression tightened. She turned to me. You had this tested? The morning after you fined me. Why didn't you tell me? I figured facts worked better than arguments. Before Karen could answer, another county truck pulled into the street. This one carried a trailer loaded with orange traffic cones, portable signs, and several rolled-up banners. 3 firefighters climbed out. One carried a drone case, another unloaded weather monitoring equipment. Gus slowly removed his baseball cap. Ethan, I have no idea. Marshal Reynolds smiled. I forgot to mention. He waved the firefighters over. We requested additional support. Karen looked increasingly alarmed. For what? The marshal unfolded another aerial map across the hood of his truck. We're planning next month's wildfire preparedness demonstrations. Mrs. Alvarez leaned closer. The public demonstrations? Exactly. The ones schools attend? He nodded. We usually hold them at county training grounds. Karen interrupted. And, he pointed directly at my property, we're considering moving one here. Silence. Absolute silence. Karen looked from the map to my lawn. "I'm sorry," she spoke slowly. "You want to bring wildfire demonstrations?" She pointed toward my house. "Into this neighborhood?" "Controlled demonstrations." He smiled reassuringly. "With full safety measures." Karen's face turned pale. "This is a residential subdivision, which is precisely why residents benefit from seeing how defensible landscaping works." She looked horrified. "You can't possibly be serious." Marshal Reynolds looked genuinely puzzled. "Why not?" Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The marshal continued. "We've already spoken with the County Emergency Management Office." He pointed toward my irrigation system. "This property already contains one of the strongest demonstration features we've found." "The lawn?" "The irrigation planning." He smiled. "We'd like homeowners to see that smart water use and fire safety can work together." Several neighbors immediately began asking questions. "Will children be able to attend? Can we see the equipment? Will firefighters explain everything?" The marshal answered each one enthusiastically. Karen wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at the words written across the top of the proposal. Community Firebreak Education and Live Demonstration Site. She looked at me. "This is because of my complaint," I answered. "Honestly?" "No," she frowned. "It's because your complaint made someone notice the lawn." Before she could respond, one of the firefighters approached the marshal carrying a radio. "Chief? What is it?" "The State Forestry Coordinator approved the request." The marshal smiled broadly. "Excellent." He turned back toward everyone. "I suppose it's official now." Karen's voice barely escaped. "What's official?" Marshal Reynolds folded the map. "In 3 weeks." He looked directly at my lawn. "This property will host the county's first neighborhood firebreak field exercise." Then he added one sentence that made Karen's eyes widen. "And every HOA board in the county has been invited to attend." News spread through Oakridge Hills far faster than any wildfire ever could. By the following Monday, nearly everyone had heard that the county planned to use my property for a live wildfire preparedness demonstration. The story changed slightly every time someone repeated it. One neighbor claimed helicopters were coming. Another insisted firefighters would burn half the neighborhood. Someone even started a rumor that my lawn was being converted into a permanent emergency station. None of it was true. The actual plan was surprisingly simple. Marshal Reynolds returned with engineers, forestry specialists, and 2 landscape experts to explain exactly what would happen. They walked the property with measuring wheels and GPS equipment, occasionally stopping to make notes on tablets. Instead of focusing on my house, they spent most of their time studying the narrow strip where my backyard met the dry county grassland. Karen watched from across the street almost every afternoon. She never approached the group. She simply stood beside her SUV, trying to understand why so many county vehicles kept visiting the very lawn she had called wasteful. One afternoon, I finally walked over to her. "You've been out here 3 days in a row." "I have questions." "So ask." She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Are they really planning to light a fire behind your house?" "Yes." She looked stunned. "And you're comfortable with that?" I wasn't at first. I pointed toward the county crew installing temporary underground moisture sensors. Then they explained every safety system. Karen followed my finger. Portable water tanks had already arrived. Fire engines would surround the demonstration area. Wind sensors had been installed at 4 locations. Even the demonstration fire would remain inside a carefully prepared test section no larger than a 2-car garage. "They've thought of everything," I said. Karen quietly nodded. "I suppose they have." The following Saturday, the county hosted an open planning session before the actual demonstration. Instead of fences or closed gates, they invited every homeowner to walk through the site and ask questions. Families wandered from station to station while firefighters explained ember behavior, defensible space, irrigation planning, and evacuation procedures. Children quickly became fascinated. One firefighter showed them how different plants burned at different speeds. Another demonstrated the protective clothing crews wore during wildfire responses. The biggest crowd gathered around a thermal imaging camera that allowed everyone to see heat moving across different materials. Olivia looked through the screen and laughed. "My dad's coffee is hotter than the sidewalk." "It usually is," the firefighter replied with a grin. Karen stayed near the edge of the crowd, arms folded as always. But something was different. She wasn't interrupting. She was listening. Marshal Reynolds eventually noticed her standing alone and walked over. "Would you like the tour?" "I don't think so." "Why not?" Karen looked toward my lawn. "I've already caused enough trouble." The marshal smiled kindly. "I don't see it that way." She frowned. "You don't?" "No." He pointed toward the demonstration area. "If you hadn't filed your complaint, I probably never would have inspected this property." Karen didn't answer. "We've been searching for a realistic neighborhood example for nearly a year." He looked around at the families gathered on the lawn. "Now we'll be able to teach hundreds of homeowners without asking them to drive 40 miles to a training facility." Karen lowered her eyes. "I was trying to stop his sprinklers." "I know." Marshal Reynolds smiled. "You accidentally helped us find the best classroom we could have asked for." She gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "I don't think anyone has ever thanked me for filing a complaint." "There's a first time for everything." Later that afternoon, the county crew began placing temporary educational signs around the property. Each one explained a different fire safety principle using plain language and simple illustrations. One sign described how moisture slowed surface flames. Another explained why trimmed vegetation protected homes better than decorative stone alone. Near the back fence, workers installed the largest sign of all. It displayed an aerial photograph of Oakridge Hills with a bright green strip running directly behind my property. Across the top were the words, "How one well-maintained lawn can help slow a wildfire." Neighbors gathered around it almost immediately. Gus studied the map for nearly a full minute. "I've walked this neighborhood for 15 years. He shook his head. "I never realized how close all that dry grass is." Mrs. Alvarez nodded beside him. "Neither did I." For the first time, people weren't looking at my lawn because it was greener than theirs. They were looking at it because they finally understood why it mattered. As the crowd slowly dispersed, a county photographer began taking pictures of the demonstration site for educational brochures. He photographed the irrigation system, the moisture sensors, the Firebreak boundary, and several firefighters explaining equipment to local families. Then he asked one final question. "Marshal, should I get a picture of the homeowner too?" Before the marshal could answer, Karen quietly stepped aside so she wouldn't be in the frame. Marshal Reynolds noticed. He looked at both of us for a moment before smiling. "No." The photographer looked confused. "No?" "This story isn't about one homeowner." He swept his hand toward the families talking with firefighters across the lawn. It's about an entire neighborhood learning something together. Karen stood silently beside the walking path, watching children ask questions they had never thought to ask before. For the first time since all of this had begun, she wasn't looking at my sprinklers. She was looking beyond them. And somehow, I had the feeling the biggest surprise wasn't going to come from the fire demonstration. It was going to come from Karen herself. The morning of the demonstration began before sunrise. By 6 o'clock, Oakridge Hills looked nothing like its usual quiet self. Fire engines lined the entrance road with their emergency lights flashing softly instead of blaring sirens. County forestry trucks unloaded equipment beside the dry grassland, while volunteers placed folding chairs beneath shaded tents for residents who wanted to watch. Everything felt organized, calm, and surprisingly welcoming. The biggest surprise wasn't the firefighters. It was the audience. Representatives from nearly 20 different HOAs across the county arrived carrying notebooks instead of clipboards. Landscape contractors, emergency managers, city planners, and even a local television crew quietly took their seats. They weren't there to watch something burn. They were there to learn. Karen noticed the television cameras immediately. She looked at me. They're covering this? I guess they think it's worth sharing. She didn't answer. Instead, she quietly moved toward the back of the crowd where nobody would notice her. Marshal Reynolds stepped onto the small presentation platform just after 8. Good morning, everyone. The conversations faded instantly. Today's exercise isn't about creating a fire. He paused, looking across the crowd. It's about preventing one. He gestured toward the dry county grass stretching beyond my backyard. Every summer, thousands of neighborhoods across the country border vegetation just like this. Most homeowners don't realize how quickly surface fire can spread through dry grass under the right wind conditions. He pointed toward my lawn. Today we're going to show what happens when thoughtful landscaping interrupts that. Spread? Several firefighters rolled out large weather monitors while another crew checked wind speed one final time. Behind them, a small section of dry grass had been prepared inside a heavily protected test area surrounded by hoses, water tanks, and fire engines. Everything was ready. Marshal Reynolds looked toward the command officer. Conditions? Wind steady. Humidity acceptable. Safety crews in position. He nodded. Proceed. A firefighter touched a drip torch to the edge of the dry grass. A narrow line of flame appeared. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. The fire simply crept forward through the brittle vegetation, exactly as the marshal had explained during the safety briefing. Children watched silently. Adults leaned forward. Within moments, the flames began moving faster as the dry grass fed them. Karen instinctively took one step backward. Then the fire reached the wide green strip surrounding my backyard. The difference was immediate. The flames slowed. The bright orange front that had been racing through the dry grass suddenly lost its energy. Instead of climbing higher, it struggled to find enough dry fuel to continue. Firefighters calmly observed while thermal cameras recorded every second. Within less than a minute, the active flames had nearly disappeared. One firefighter lightly sprayed the remaining hot spots. The demonstration was over. The entire crowd remained silent, not because it had been frightening, because it had been so simple. Marshal Reynolds walked onto the demonstration area, holding a thermal camera screen large enough for everyone to see. This image tells the story. The display showed intense heat across the dry grassland. The moment the fire reached the healthy, irrigated strip, The heat signature dropped dramatically. He turned toward the audience. "A firebreak doesn't have to stop every fire." He smiled. "It simply has to buy firefighters time." Several people began taking photographs of the thermal image. Landscape professionals scribbled notes. HOA board members whispered to one another while pointing at the demonstration area. One woman from another neighborhood raised her hand. Could this be replicated elsewhere? "It already is," Marshal Reynolds replied. "But too often, homeowners are discouraged from maintaining the very landscaping that increases resilience." His eyes briefly met Karen's. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. The lesson had already landed. A television reporter approached me during the break. "Mr. Cole, what inspired you to build this fire-conscious irrigation system?" I smiled. "I wasn't trying to build a demonstration." "So why did you do it?" "My backyard borders dry grass." I shrugged. "I just wanted to take care of my home." Before the interview continued, the reporter noticed Karen standing alone near the edge of the crowd. She walked over. "Excuse me." Karen looked surprised. "Yes?" "Weren't you the HOA representative who originally questioned the sprinklers?" Karen hesitated. Several cameras quietly turned in her direction. For a moment, it looked as though she might simply walk away. Instead, she took a slow breath. "Yes." "What do you think, after seeing today's demonstration?" Karen looked toward the green lawn, then toward the blackened strip of grass only a few yards beyond it. Finally, she answered honestly. "I thought I was protecting neighborhood standards." She paused. "I didn't realize I was criticizing something that was quietly protecting the neighborhood itself." The reporter lowered her microphone slightly. "That's an unusual thing to admit publicly." Karen gave a small smile. "So was being wrong publicly." Several people nearby quietly nodded. No one clapped. No one mocked her. The moment didn't need winners or losers. It simply needed honesty. As firefighters began packing equipment, one county planner hurried toward Marshal Reynolds carrying a folder. "Chief," he looked unusually excited, "you need to see this." The marshal opened the folder, read the first page, and looked back toward my property with genuine surprise. Then he smiled. "I wasn't expecting approval this quickly." I walked over. "Approval for what?" He closed the folder. "The state reviewed today's results. In real time." He looked directly at me. "And they've just made a decision that could change how neighborhoods across the county prepare for wildfire." The crowd gathered closer as Marshal Reynolds reopened the folder. For a brief moment, he simply looked across the demonstration site, the healthy green lawn, the blackened strip of county grass beyond it, the firefighters packing equipment, and the family still talking excitedly about everything they had learned. Then he smiled. "I've just received confirmation from the State Wildfire Preparedness Office." The conversations stopped. "They've approved a new pilot program." He looked directly at me. "Based on today's demonstration, Oakridge Hills will become the first neighborhood in the county to participate in the Community Firewise Landscape Initiative." Several county officials exchanged smiles. One of the landscape architects couldn't help clapping. The audience quickly joined in. Karen looked genuinely confused. "What exactly does that mean?" Marshal Reynolds turned toward the crowd. "It means homeowners who voluntarily install efficient irrigation, maintain defensible landscaping, and follow wildfire mitigation recommendations can receive free annual fire safety evaluations, educational support, and priority technical assistance from our department." He paused. "No fines. No mandates. No penalties." He smiled. "Just neighbors helping neighbors become safer." That sentence seemed to resonate throughout the audience. Representatives from other HOAs immediately began asking questions. Several wanted enrollment information. Others wanted copies of today's demonstration plans. One board president admitted his community had spent years arguing about lawn appearances instead of discussing wildfire preparedness. The television reporter quietly shook her head. "I didn't expect a sprinkler complaint to become a statewide pilot program." "Neither did I admitted. As the interviews wrapped up, Karen slowly walked toward the demonstration area. She stopped at the edge of the green grass where it met the narrow black line left behind by the controlled burn. For several seconds, she simply stared at the contrast. Healthy green, charred brown, only a few feet apart. Marshal Reynolds joined her without saying anything. "I've been thinking," Karen finally said. "About what?" "My complaint." She looked down at the ground. "I wasn't really upset about sprinklers." The marshal waited. "I was upset because one lawn looked different." She gave a quiet laugh. "I confused different with wrong." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "That happens more often than you'd think." Karen looked across the neighborhood. "I spent years trying to make every house look the same." She watched children running between the educational displays while firefighters answered their questions. But neighborhoods aren't remembered because every lawn matches. She smiled faintly. They're remembered because people care about each other. Before the marshal could respond, Olivia ran over carrying a small plastic firefighter helmet someone had given her. "Miss Karen." Karen turned. "Yes?" Olivia held out a laminated certificate the fire department had been handing to children. "I got my Junior Fire Safety Explorer certificate." Karen smiled. "Congratulations." "You should get one too." Karen laughed. "I think I'm a little old for that." Olivia shook her head. "You learned something today." Several firefighters overheard the conversation and laughed. One of them reached into a box and pulled out another certificate. He handed it to Karen. Across the top, it read, "Community Fire Safety Participant." Everyone around them chuckled. Karen looked at the certificate for a long moment. Instead of acting embarrassed, she accepted it. "I suppose I did earn this." Later that afternoon, the HOA board held a brief special meeting beneath the shade tent instead of inside the clubhouse. It lasted less than 15 minutes. The board unanimously voted to eliminate the landscaping language that had allowed subjective complaints about visual inconsistency. In its place, they adopted a much simpler principle. Landscaping that improves safety, conserves resources, or benefits the community should be encouraged, not discouraged. No one argued. No one voted against it. It passed without a single objection. Over the following months, Oakridge Hills slowly changed. Several homeowners upgraded to efficient irrigation systems after attending free county workshops. Others created fire-resistant planting beds using native vegetation. Families worked together on weekend landscaping projects while firefighters occasionally stopped by to answer questions and offer advice. Ironically, neighborhood water use actually dropped. The smarter irrigation methods reduced waste while keeping lawns healthier than before. Every time I saw that happen, I couldn't help smiling. Karen had complained because she believed my sprinklers were wasting water. Instead, they inspired an entire community to use less. One evening, near the end of summer, I stood on my porch watching the sprinklers complete their familiar 15-minute cycle just before sunrise. The grass glistened softly beneath the first light of morning. Karen happened to be walking the neighborhood trail. She paused for a moment. Instead of reaching for a clipboard, she simply gave me a small wave. "Looks like the system's working." "It always was," she smiled. "I know." Then she continued her walk without another word. Sometimes the biggest victories don't come from proving someone wrong. They come from helping an entire neighborhood discover something better than the argument they started with. Thank you for spending your time with Sovereign Verdict. If you enjoy completely original HOA stories filled with clever revenge, unforgettable twists, heartfelt moments, and satisfying endings, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next battle where creativity and common sense show nonsense behind nonsense.